Tania Bhattacharya. Hello.
Hi, so good to be here.
Oh, I'm so grateful that you were in this space. For anybody who does not know you, who are you today?
That's such a good question. I spent a lot of time thinking about this as like a INFJ
Mm,
Pisces person.
mm,
Who I am today is, I feel very tenderhearted today. I am a person who helps people show up on LinkedIn, whatever that looks like for them. Sometimes it's very business related. Sometimes it's about personal self fulfillment and healing and just like sharing more of themselves in a really creative way.
mhm.
Sometimes, usually it's somewhere in the middle of those two things, right? But yeah, I'm a Southern Californian. I'm a dog mom. I'm a podcaster as well. I'm a storyteller. I am a recovering nonprofit fundraiser.
Oh boy.
Oh boy, oh boy. We could have some chats about that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm all about social impact, social change, and using my very specific, like, writing skills and storytelling skills that I've always kind of honed ever since before I knew I was doing that, like as a kid and whatnot, to kind of help people who are doing good work show up in a deeper, more influential way.
Yeah. Well, I found you through Kel Haney, who is on the
Yeah.
current fundraising situation, who we've had on the
Hmm.
podcast. And Kel was like, "You and Tanya are like, you need to," and so I was like, "All right, I trust." And here we are. And I am so excited for this conversation because I feel, and I will only speak on behalf of myself, but I think that this is probably a generally felt thing in the artist sphere, that LinkedIn specifically feels like one of the many social media sites that I don't have to engage with, given the kind of career that I have, that I'm not going to be recruited necessarily for the same kind of job as an actor that I would if I were trying to find a full-time salaried position, which I wish that were more the situation of the stability part of what I do, but just logistically the search is
Yeah.
different. And I think there's an understanding that I have of what LinkedIn is for and what it's not for.
Mm,
And I'd love to
right.
kind of debunk that, or maybe rewire that for my own brain. And I imagine many listeners out here, in the way in which LinkedIn actually can serve us
Yeah.
as creatives, as people who are self expressive, as people who have a long lineage of storytelling abilities, and how it actually is a platform that does allow for all of that. And we're just not using it the way that it can be used.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That's a perfect setup of this kind of big situation that I find myself
Yeah.
um debunking oftentimes. And
Mhm.
there's a very good reason why people automatically think of LinkedIn as this place to find a full-time job, this place that's kind of stuffy, corporate, sterile,
Yeah.
this place that is like an absolute virtual depiction of like a uncomfortable, too cold boardroom table
Yeah.
setting with like fluorescent lights.
Yeah.
That's what people oftentimes think LinkedIn is. And there's some truth to that because LinkedIn kind of started that way. LinkedIn has been around since before MySpace. It's like ancient in the terms of like how long it's been around. And when it started, it was very much about finding a job, recruitment, things like that. But over the years, and I found that this change has like sped up over the last couple of years, especially once everybody started working from home. You know, the realities of our working situation changed so starkly in 2020 and beyond that LinkedIn has sort of morphed into a place where you can really build a beautiful, creative, human personal brand and really start to show up as yourself. I often tell people, don't try to show up as a resume on LinkedIn,
Mm.
show up as a resource. Share what you are going through, share what you've been through, learn out loud. Share what your vision is, and the
Mhm.
right people will begin to emerge out of the woodwork because LinkedIn is a place where you can it's still unsaturated. That's the other piece about it. I
In
think
what
some of these
way? Like,
other
what do you mean by
platforms,
that?
like even though there's quite a few, there's like I think 900 million active users, only
And you're like, "This isn't
3%.
saturated." I'm like,
I know. But when you look at the other platforms, they
yeah.
have so much more. And not just that, but only 3% of LinkedIn users actually share content at all. So we've
Mm.
got a lot of LinkedIn lurkers. We got a lot of people who are on there checking it every now and then, scrolling the platform. They're never going to share their own stuff. They're never going to, well, not never. They're not always going to engage, but they are watching, they are internalizing, they are building trust in what other folks have to say. And it's just a matter of, you're building relationship. It's just
Mhm.
invisible. It's just invisible relationship sometimes on LinkedIn. So it's so interesting. It's unlike any other platform that I've really used or been a part of. But I discovered how magical it could be when I was still a nonprofit ED. And, by the way, I love Kel so much. Like, she
Yeah,
is really just a shining star. And she makes fundraising look so good because I know she's like all about taking the ick out of the ask and
exactly.
making it transformational versus transactional. And that's really how it should be. And there's
Mhm.
such a need for Kel and there's such a need for her work because I found fundraising to be a space that could have been so imbued with creativity and art and beauty and relationship. And just because of, I don't know. Like, I don't know if it's the systems we live in. I don't know if it's the power and privilege that many donors tend to have. I don't know if it's just, I don't know. Like, it's a lot of things, but it didn't feel that way. But when I was on LinkedIn, I did find these glimpses of really beautiful transformational relationship versus
Mhm.
transactional stuff. And I can get into that if you want, but
I would
let
love
me
to,
let me see
yeah.
how this is landing with you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it definitely I hear what you're saying, and because I don't understand how it works, I think
Yeah.
I'm missing the link of this is how it can be transformational.
Yeah, yeah. So then let me share my story. Let me
Please,
share my story of how I discovered
would
that.
love to hear
So,
it.
the organization that I worked for was a nonprofit addiction treatment program for women and their families. And I was there for 12 years. So, right out of school,
Wow.
hopped right in, started fundraising, didn't know a whole lot about much at all.
Mhm,
I was like Bambi, right? And one of the very first sort of tasks that I was given as a, fresh out of college kind of person was, hey, why don't you like get to know some of our alumni and start, seeing if you can shape a storytelling campaign, see who's interested in sharing their story of what they have been through, what they've overcome, what their life is like now. And, let's see how we can share that with the people in our community. And I was like, okay. So I started doing that. And it took time, right, to build trust, to build
mhm.
rapport, to, even to like sort of tease out their story in a way that felt strengths based, what I'll share. And I might go on a couple tangents,
It's
but I
okay,
trust that we'll get to where we need to go.
100%.
So usually the story that women would share was very much still rooted in sort of like a shame-based story, like a
Mhm,
guilt story. Like I was such a bad mom, but XYZ, or it was very much still about the addiction itself and not so much about the recovery. And so, sort of intuitively, I started just asking people more about what it is like now. Like, how are they able to help other people now that they're in recovery? Tell me about like the strengths-based pieces of your story, the courage, the resilience, the hope.
mhm,
And we really focused their story on that versus the drunkalogs versus the the really the focusing on the painful stuff. And over time, I saw how these specific women started to advocate for themselves in their lives, like in a very different way, in their home life, in their relationships, in if they were justice involved in their court dates, just everywhere. What I saw is when they were able to build a different story about themselves and tell a different story about what they've been through, you know, not just like they started seeing themselves differently, but other people started seeing them differently as a result of the story that they had embodied. And I
mhm,
thought that was so cool and so powerful. And, simultaneously as I was doing this, and I kept doing this work even as I grew in the company and became the head fundraiser. And then I became sort of like a VP level. And then eventually I became the executive director. Again, this is all over 12 years, but I kept doing that piece of it. I was like, I always want to have this little group with our women because this is so powerful. This is what keeps the mission alive within
mhm.
me. And so, we were pretty small. We weren't huge. We didn't have like a consulting PR firm. We didn't have a large marketing team. And so at a certain point, I realized, okay, we need to get our name out there in a bigger way. Like, we're a pretty small fish in a big pond. Like, we need to do something to get our stories out there in a
Yeah.
deeper way. And so I was like, why don't I just start messing around with LinkedIn, right? Like we had an Instagram, we had, different things, but I was like, I don't think we're maximizing LinkedIn in the way that we could. And so I challenged myself to tell one interesting story per week on LinkedIn. And it wasn't, if I was sharing the story of one of our alumni, it was with very, very expressed permission. Like they had agreed, like, yes,
Mhm.
this is something I want to, share for the benefit of the mission. But I'd also share my personal stories around mental health, around what I was discovering as a young nonprofit executive director. I just started sharing things that I cared about. I started sharing pictures and stories about the, coalitions that I was a part of building behind the scenes. And it was slow work. Like for about 2 months to 3 months, it kind of felt like nothing was happening. It
Mhm.
felt like, it wasn't really making a ripple
And you
effect.
were, like,
But
writing these
I
little blog posts. That's what this was, correct?
yeah, like,
Okay.
not even blog. I would say they're about 200 words. They were short. They
Okay.
were like 2 paragraphs
Do
kinda
they
thing.
act as little messages that pop up on who follow you, and that's what people get? Again, like, break this down for me as though I've
Yeah.
never looked on LinkedIn in my life.
Okay, got it. No, I really appreciate that. I appreciate that that prompting. So yeah, I mean, they essentially show up as little mini stories on a feed
Yeah.
that people who were following me would see. And the beautiful thing about LinkedIn too is the people who were following me, like their contacts would start to see it if they engaged. So let's say
Okay.
I had a board member, like let's say our board chair saw what I was sharing and liked it and left a little comment. Many of the people in their network would start to see it, and these were decision makers, right? They were
Yeah.
power brokers. They were movers and shakers in our local community. They were, yeah, they were decision makers who had the ability to funnel resources toward our work if they could feel an emotional reaction and resonance to what we were
Got it.
doing. And so these stories were doing that, like invisibly, slowly, not with a bang, right? But with a whimper, I guess. Like it was slow work.
Yeah.
But I kept doing it. And part of the reason I kept doing it is because I actually realized that I started enjoying it. And so to your work around like, art and, can artists show up on LinkedIn? I would argue that writing for LinkedIn is an art in and of itself. Like
Mhm.
it's a way to practice our own creativity, especially when we're in roles that maybe we have a part-time corporate job, or maybe there is a mission driven component to our work and we want to connect with other people who can donate, who can connect us with people who have resources that can support our work. Board members, potential volunteers who can come alongside us and support us with their time, talent, and treasure. So anyway, back to my little experiment. After about 90, like there was a tipping point at about 90 days. Like it
Okay.
took about a quarter, I will say. And that's, I think people's oftentimes when something is not working within a week or a month, it's
Yeah, you
like,
wanna
oh,
throw in the
this isn't
towel.
working.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like, oh, LinkedIn doesn't work. And the reality is like it just takes a little bit more time. Um, but what I noticed is instead of me having to knock on doors, pound the pavement, ask for money, send all these like, letters asking for sponsorship dollars, companies started coming to us and saying, hey, like, you don't know me. I saw this come up on my feed. I see you're having this event at, like insert local country club. How can we get involved? Like, is this something
Mm.
that we should bring our team to? Like, tell me more, essentially. There was an invitation to get involved. Instead of sending out pitches to, reporters we didn't know, people started coming out of the woodwork and saying, hey, like I have a magazine, or hey, I run this like big blog in the local area. Can we do a feature on you? And instead of, in terms of referrals for the I mean, we were a specialty healthcare organization. Physicians, interventionists, HR teams started reaching out to
Okay.
us and saying, we have somebody that, we don't know how to address the situation, but there's somebody in our ecosystem, in our midst, that needs treatment and we don't know what
Mhm.
to do. Like, can you help? And so we started getting very like aligned, perfect, sort of like right fit opportunities just from showing up and consistently sharing our stories. And
Wow.
what better feeling is that? So that's a little snapshot of the
Yeah.
transformational piece.
Wow, I hear the difference in my mind. It's like on Facebook, which I don't use, but I
Mm,
have, or I used to for sure. Like, it used to be like you would create a little, I guess it's kind of like the little posts that you would make for your page, and then that would go into
Yeah.
people's feed, and then as you're scrolling through the feed, those little posts would pop up, or if you were in a group, the little posts, those kind of things. But the difference that I'm hearing is when one on Facebook creates it just on your own feed, it only sticks with your feed and your friends unless people share
Right.
it. Whereas on
Right.
LinkedIn, if anybody engages with it, it automatically starts to populate in people's feeds, whether they've really asked for it or not, because they assume that by connection, because that's all LinkedIn is, like you have a degree of separation, by however many degrees you are, this person most likely will be in alignment with the type of things that you do, just knowing the algorithm on the back end. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, that's a beautiful description of it. You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
And how beautiful is that? Like, can we just take a moment to like uh, I think building community is such a powerful thing, especially in this day and age when we're
Yeah.
so like kind of isolated and disconnected and
100%.
discombobulated. Like LinkedIn has figured out how to, and they've applied it from a business development standpoint. But the reality is, like you and I are connected in terms of like we have a mutual friend, like we have common values, we have
Yeah.
things that we mutually care about. So of course, the people in our midst, there's a likelihood that they too would be interested in what we have to say, and
100%.
so it's just a very beautiful sort of like meta way of how community works in real life.
Well, I think that's why I'm interested in understanding it more, because as
Yeah.
somebody who consistently seeks to build community, arguably that is what we're trying to do here with Empowered Artists Collective. It
Mm.
was when it was in its first inception as an incubator program, like that is literally what it was like, how do we build this community and expand your resources and your network without it feeling icky around it?
Yeah.
And the continuation through a podcast, although it's usually me and a guest, it's like I'm bringing on people who hopefully are in valued alignment with understanding the world that they are hoping to see as well. And that usually includes community, and how are we expanding that? And so for me, I love the idea that for a space that, as you say, is not oversaturated, in my mind, that's a lot, but in comparison, say, to other more oversaturated
Yeah.
spaces, and for, if you're saying only 3% or even a small margin of those users are using this kind of function to create this community, who better than artists who already have that as an ethos for the way in which they live in the world and the work that they create? Like, who better to use that platform in a way that it actually isn't really being used than
Yeah.
folks who are naturally inclined to storytell and naturally inclined to create community and are hoping and to create more ways to do that. I think that's such a wonderful prospect for, in
Yeah.
the ether webs, how do we kind of continue going outside of the spheres that we already know so deeply?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. How do I begin then? Let's
Yeah.
dial it back. Let's say I'm like, you know what? This sounds really exciting. I'm going to start to use LinkedIn. And I want to
Yeah.
kind of gargle in my mouth as I say these words, because adding another social media onto the mix makes me want to not talk about it. But here I am. Let's say I've decided, you know what? This actually feels more in alignment. I actually feel like I have some things to say that I don't want to have a, 100-word count to talk about it. I
Mm.
want to use it as a way to build community as opposed to just like me sharing, just into the ether. I also, if I'm thinking about it, is a long-term way of bringing people into the folds for potential opportunities for, yeah, investment, or people who have more resources than maybe I do, or access to things that I don't, to kind of start to bring these people into the fold. Where do I start? Do I sit with
Yeah.
myself and think, all right, these are the things that I want to talk about? Do I just like go shoot from the hip? Like, what do I do?
I love this question. This is a great question. And I would say it is a good idea to sit and think about the things that you want to talk about, but where I was going to go initially with this answer
Yeah.
was to actually like dust off your profile, right? Because the profile is
Okay.
kind of like the like it's like the homepage, it's like the
Yeah.
digital homepage. And I would say like I totally understand the feeling of wanting to gargle in your mouth thinking of adding another social media platform,
Yeah.
because there's like it can create overwhelm for sure. And what I'll say to anybody feeling that way is that, you don't like, I will say LinkedIn is a low lift platform. You don't have to show up every day. In fact, I don't recommend it. Like when I was doing this as a nonprofit ED, I was showing up once per week.
Mhm.
And that was more than enough to like really show up, because again, LinkedIn is it's not saturated yet, and so your content will have a longer shelf life. The other thing I'll say before I talk more about like the actual answer to your question is that, LinkedIn is a very trusted site in the eyes of Google. Like it is highly indexed in the eyes of
Mhm.
Google. And so when you Google yourself, like when you search for Jennifer Apple, most likely your LinkedIn is going to be one of the higher things to show up just because of, again, how Google sees LinkedIn. And so even if you're like, you know what, like I'm going to be in this 97% of people who like has a LinkedIn and just doesn't like share my own content all the time because it feels too overwhelming because I have all this other stuff going on, just dust off your profile. Because when people start to Google you, because you put yourself out there in a new way, your LinkedIn will be one of the things to come up,
When
right?
you say
So,
dust it though, are we talking
mhm.
about, making sure that you have all of the years and jobs that you've ever had input appropriately? Is it that you need people to endorse you? Also, what is that? Like,
Right,
is it like,
right.
like what are we talking about just before you go and answer the question?
Yeah, yeah. I think all of that stuff is less important than showing up as kind of like an embodied representation of again, the world that you're trying to build. And so what that can look like is, for those of you who maybe started a LinkedIn when LinkedIn opened, like in
Yeah.
2005 and haven't returned, they've added a lot more features that make it a lot more possible to build like a human driven brand. So for example, the very first thing you see when you show up on somebody's LinkedIn profile is a cover banner. And this is a pretty thick banner. Like this is good real estate. And so for all of you artists out there, especially kind of like visual artists, this is a great place to demonstrate, some of your art. If you are like in the theater, like like have a picture of you performing, like this is a place where you can really showcase who you are and how you want to represent yourself as an artist. And my medium is words. Like I'm a writer, but like at the same time, a picture is worth 1,000 words.
Yeah.
So that's a beautiful place to start. Then, of course, there's your headshot. Feel free to be yourself in your headshot, be you. Um, right below that is your headline. So the automatic thing is going to show up there is kind of like your title and company. So let's say, yours is going to say like Jennifer Apple with Empowered Artist Collective, like something like that, like whatever you input. You can change that headline to whatever you want. And I'm a big proponent of changing it to kind of like a description of who you are, what you believe in, the
Mm.
world you're trying to build, like what you're passionate about, because that is what's going to draw people in.
Can
Like
I
that
ask what
is,
yours
yeah.
is?
Yeah, like mine is a little one sentence description. It's like I support it's something like I support good humans and showing up as the thought leaders they are. And then
Mhm.
it talks a little bit more about like my podcast and
Okay.
what it's about. I've experimented with different things. Like I used to have dog mom on there. I used to say like tender-hearted Pisces because that really is like the perfect that's who I am at my core. So you can talk about who you are. Like it doesn't have to be
Okay.
all about your job.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a
Yeah.
fun opportunity then, because that really
Yeah.
is it kind of goes back to, like, why I ask, who you are today, and people bring in all sorts of
Mm.
things when I ask that question. Some people really lead from, like, I am feeling X, Y, and Z in this moment. Some people lead from, like, their career titles. Some people lead from, their human interests, and some people do all of the above.
Yeah.
And for me, it's neither good or bad. It's just like people are
Right.
owning what they are feeling in that moment is the thing that is taking up the space. And I feel that this is a beautiful opportunity in that little byline of putting in what feels truthful in that moment to you. And it can be, whatever it is. Like it could be, okay, these are some titles that have to do with my career, but this also is something that I like, a love of mine and an interest of mine, or a passion of mine, or how I self-identify, or any of those things. And so that would be the thing that shows up in my Google search when you search Jennifer Apple LinkedIn.
Yeah, like that will show up. That will also show up. It'll follow you around the platform. So if you are, commenting on someone else's post, like that will show up there as well.
Okay.
And so I love what you actually just said because I think how you demonstrate who you are and how you're showing up in your headline is a great depiction of your values and what's important to you. And like you said, there's no right answer or wrong answer. Like I've seen major executives for like Fortune 500 companies having their headline like grandmother of five, and it's
Yeah.
like, okay, that's awesome because I know what's important to you and the right people are going to show up and resonate with her,
Yeah. Yeah.
accordingly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, okay, so you have this photo that's an opportunity, you have this little byline that's an opportunity. And then is there anything else that I need to dust off
Yeah.
and perfect before I start to create these little stories that that we've totally sidetracked, but we'll get
Yeah.
to, and I'm not worried about it?
Yeah, yeah, two things. I would say two big things. And one is going to be your featured section, and that's relatively new. That came out in the last, I want to say like 2 years or so.
Mhm.
And so that's a pretty large part of your profile where you can actually feature. I think of it as like a bulletin board. It's like where you can feature things you're proud of. And this is great for folks who would consider themselves artists. And again, like that's such a broad term. I see everyone
100%.
who is sharing content on LinkedIn as an artist in their own way. But that's a place where you can share like media rich content, whether it's a video, a YouTube video, a PDF, a website, like a picture, a LinkedIn piece of content. And so that will show up and attract people in. That's like showing off who, like the things that you're most proud of that you want to see people right away when they kind of land on your profile.
And is it like a bulletin board where you're like, check out my website and then you link it? Or like, I have this freebie, you can download it here. Then there's it's like
Yeah.
that kind of thing? Or is it just like one word
Yeah.
of what they
No,
are?
it's not one word. Like you can see a lot more than one word. You see kind of like a picture and then you see a description and you see a title. So it's kind of like the first thing you describe.
Okay.
Like it's more rich than just like a word or two. And so the last thing that I would dust off, and this is an opportunity to really be self-reflective. I would say to dust off your about section because
Okay.
so many people, again, this is where resumes go to die. Like this is boring bio central. This is just like, oh my God, this is so boring, like blah. And you don't have to be boring. Like, you can be you. Like share your story in your about section. Like I like to think of my about section as being and this is you have quite a bit of words you can use here. I think the limit's like 2,600 characters. So that's a
Oh,
pretty big chunk. That's a
yeah.
pretty big chunk,
That's
you
like a paper
know?
that people try to get to when they're writing, something in class and they're like, I need to put some spaces between my periods.
Right, right.
Yeah, that's a lot. Okay.
It's a lot. It's a lot. And it's beautiful because stories are the one thing where people are gonna like really it's a shortcut to trust. Like short stories are everything. But so I'd recommend putting in there, something about the problem that you're wanting to solve in the world through your art, the transformation that you're passionate about making possible, like who it is that you serve and who you want to talk to, like who you want to kind of be connected with through your LinkedIn. I would share, a bit of your origin story, like your brand story. Like, why is it that you do what you do now? Like, what is it that you have grown through to become the guide that you are, right?
Mm,
All of those kinds of things. It doesn't have to be like it doesn't have to be boring. Make it fun.
yeah. Yeah. Who knew that LinkedIn wasn't just my resume and listing the years and time that I was a part of them? Yeah, I think these are wonderful little tidbits because anyone who is in most likely the majority of the people who are listening to this space are storytellers in some capacity, whether it's visual, whether it's through their bodies, whether it's through their hearts and their spirits, whether it's through their voices, whatever it is, like people are sharing of themselves in creative ways. And to know that there is space for that in LinkedIn and that there aren't rules for it and it doesn't have to feel corporate in that way, and arguably that actually makes you stand out on that site without trying so hard and or putting in effort on a consistent basis. It's a one-time drop of let me put this here and I can always edit it if I want to. That
Yeah.
feels very fruitful as an opportunity. So thank you for sharing that. Um,
Yeah.
Now I want to go back to like, I create these posts. What am I doing?
Yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. So, and that's very much up to you. So there's quite a
Okay.
few different types of posts that you can do on LinkedIn. Sort of the most popular is just like an image and some text, like some story. But you can also do polls, and that is really fun to build community because you
Okay.
get to, people for whatever reason, like when I'm scrolling Instagram, like I'll just like everything. I'll just leave comments on all. I'll just like, I'm
Yeah.
just on there. On LinkedIn, it's a little different, and I think part of that is because it's again that community linkage piece. When I comment on something, I know that, potentially my boss, my ex-boss, my coworkers, like people
Yeah.
in my professional life are going to see what I'm up to on there. So people are less likely to just like leave all these long comments. They still do. I mean, they do if you nurture your community. But
Interesting though.
yeah, yeah. It's an
Interesting.
interesting little nugget, it's an
Mhm.
interesting nugget.
Well, because
But
it's a way that I think the internet's a scary place, and people are
yeah.
really vicious and brutal and awful, and have a lot of feelings and opinions, and aren't necessarily afraid to say them behind their screen. But if you know that the trail follows you in a more active way, I imagine people are a little bit more not close to the chest necessarily, but a little bit more thoughtful about the way in which they are engaging, which frankly I wish was all over.
Yeah, honestly, yes, yes. It kind of takes away that anonymity that you can have on like
Mhm.
Twitter, or I guess I don't, now it's X, and all these different spaces.
Yeah.
LinkedIn is pretty polite. Like it's pretty like you're not gonna. I think I've gotten maybe two kind of like trolly, hatery comments
Mhm.
ever since I've started building my brand. And the reality is like it's very obvious that the work that I'm doing is social change driven, and so yeah, like people are pretty polite on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So
For
that's
better
the
or for worse, I
plus.
would imagine. Right. It's kinda like you
Yeah.
want people to be able to say what they want to say, but also they recognize that this might not be the space.
Right. And I think, it's a balance. I think people are willing to say what they want to say and like speak truth to power and kind of like say what they need to say, but they're not just going to be like an anonymous hater. They're
Yeah.
not going to be a troll, right? So it's
Yeah.
like it's that balance, yeah.
Yeah.
But all that being said, I think people are less likely to just like put out whatever's on their heart just on a whim. And so I think polls are a really great way to kind of like garner interest because they're anonymous. Like people can't see how other people vote, only you can see that. So
Okay.
I've been really into that. I think doing LinkedIn lives, we could very well just have like broadcasted this onto LinkedIn Live. So like anytime you're doing a show, you're doing a talk, you're doing a whatever it is that you're doing virtually, like that can just be a LinkedIn Live as well. And you can expand your reach that way. Like that's kind of a great way to repurpose something you're already doing and just stick it on a platform where more people can find it, right? It's a
Yeah.
discoverable space.
Yeah. What happens when people
Yeah.
have, say, like this, for example, it's me and Empowered Artist Collective is its own thing. I have a whole gorgeous team behind me that are doing things as well.
Yeah.
So it's not just me in a vacuum, though in this space, obviously I'm like the face of these, conversations. What is it better for people who have like things that are not themselves but are their
Yeah.
creative extensions for those extensions to have their own LinkedIn profiles, or is it like you as a person, even though you are operating under an extension,
Yeah.
should incorporate it in your own space and not create that extra leg?
Oh, this is such a good question. This is such a good question. And this is a question that, people that are kind of like LinkedIn coaches, LinkedIn trainers, whatever you want to call
Yeah.
us, debate internally all the time.
Yeah,
Like
because
I
I
think
think
there's
about
a
it too, even
difference.
with my own coaching, where it's like it is my coaching,
Yeah.
but also like I am an actor first and foremost, and then my coaching is also a huge part of who I am, and my podcast hosting is also a huge part of who I am, and all of these kind of fall under these different umbrellas, but it is me. But the
Yes.
reach is potentially different, and the communities are potentially a little bit different also.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. So, like, anybody who's listening, you can feel free to disagree with me, but this is a hill I'm willing to die on. That I think that this kind of stuff should go under our personal brand, like you,
Okay.
Jennifer Apple. And the reason for that is because people are always wanting to get to know people
Yeah.
way more than they're wanting to like follow kind of like a faceless business account.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, companies like Apple, Nike, like these big Fortune 100 companies invest in spokespeople, they invest in branding, they invest in ways to make their company seem more like a person,
Mhm.
seem make it have a personality. And the reality is as individuals, right, as coaches, as artists, as service providers, we already have such an advantage over these big multinational conglomerates, which is that we are people, we are
Yeah.
humans, and people just want to connect at the level of our humanity. That's all we want,
Yeah.
whether we think we do or not. And so I would say have it go under your personal profile because I think that's going to have the deeper reach. That's going to build trust in a different way.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think that's like the age old conversation too. Obviously, Instagram continues to change its algorithm but it was like, okay, do you create like a company Instagram account versus your own personal, or do you start to incorporate more of that company stuff into your personal account, and how do you manage it? I just think it's an interesting conversation, and I imagine it will continue to morph as you go, but especially for
Yeah.
those, myself included, who would be starting out, if you already have people who know you and can vouch for you as a human being in a space that's all about knowing these connections and then expanding from there. If you start from yourself, then it would only expand from yourself. And I think that is a healthy way of starting. Cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And when even when I look at examples from as, huge as like Sarah Blakely and Spanx or like Richard Branson and Virgin, all the way to like, the individual who has, maybe a 5-person team, a 10-person team,
Hmm.
and has decided to create different a profile for the company and a profile for themselves. When I compare the two, the profile that's just about themselves is always doing better. There's more people commenting, there's greater reach. That's where people want to connect.
Yeah.
There comes a time, I think and I don't know where that tipping point is. I think it's different for every business, where you do maybe want to start doing some more things on the company page. And maybe that has to do with a certain number of employees. Maybe that has to do with a certain number of, projects to speak on. There's a tipping point, but definitely when you're starting out, I would focus on the personal page.
I love that. Um, what about when it comes to like the networking part? I think this is the
Mm,
thing, and people have a lot of feelings around networking, and in artist spaces, it also carries a different kind of weight just because this is a relationship built industry.
yeah.
And arguably, the jobs that one will book come from the relationships that one has and the people who are vouching on their behalf and the references that come because of the work that you have done. It's like, I mean, everything is, most businesses
Yeah.
have that, but specifically in the arts. And so when it comes to LinkedIn and it being truly about connections and spheres of connections, and how do you make larger connections and how do you get to those other connections that are connected to those other connections,
Yeah.
what are we doing?
Yeah. I love this. This is so juicy. This is fantastic. You know, on the one hand, just showing up and sharing your stories from a very personal lens and just like just really being a storyteller is organically going to help the right people start to show up. And I'll bring up Cal again just cuz she had a really good example of this happening like for her. So as she started sharing her stories, like a producer, like a pretty famous, like Tony Award winning producer started seeing her content and just reached out and said, like, I can, I can tell that you have your heart in this. And they began a relationship that way. So that will happen sometimes. If you want to speed it up, you can also reach out to people. And so I came from an industry that's also very relationship based, which is, fundraising,
Mhm.
that, hugely relationship
Yeah.
based. And what I found is that when I would, call folks and leave a message at the, corporate office, when I would send a letter, when I would send an email, I didn't get a huge response rate or a huge return rate. For whatever reason, on LinkedIn, when I sent a message to some of these individuals, these program officers, these, board members, these different people, they actually saw it. And I think that's
And
because,
you could see
emails,
who
letters.
sees it, correct? It has that
So
filter?
you can see it. It's like kind of vague. Like you could like I'm trying to so when you're on LinkedIn and you're in a message,
Mhm.
you can see that they read it because there's like a tiny little their headshot shows up
Right.
like really, really tiny, kind of down. It's kind of like a Google Hangouts if you're on Google
100%. Mhm.
Hangouts. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, okay,
Yeah,
you get
yeah.
it. So yeah, you can see if they've read it, but also like because I mean, you want them to respond. Really, is what you
Right.
want. And so I think a lot of folks are gate kept in terms of emails, letters, and calls. Like they
Yes.
have assistants, they have people that are whose whole job it is to kind of protect them from this barrage of people who want to come in and build relationship. On LinkedIn, that's not always the case. Like people have it on their phone, they have the LinkedIn app and they're on there, they're scrolling. And so I found that I was able to connect with the people I really wanted to more powerfully than any other medium. And I
Mhm.
think it's about just showing up as a human being to human being, like being interested in what they have to say. Like if somebody you want to connect with has they get an award, they change jobs, they share a story on their LinkedIn, right? They share a post. It's like, respond to that. Like
Yeah.
start with that, start with that. And the relationship will flow over time, especially if they can come over to your profile and see what it is that you do, right? You're not
Mhm.
just some faceless person.
And
You
now that
have
you've
your
dusted, you're all
yes,
gorgeous and present. Yeah, exactly.
that's it. That's it. So this is one of the scariest things to do is start to reach out and like build a relationship with folks. And it almost feels like cold calling, but it's not because really I think it's not about going in with a very specific ask, like you're asking for a certain amount of money or you're asking for this thing. You're simply building relationship. And then the ask comes later on, right? Yeah.
Oof. This is juicy. And again, it's not rocket science. I think the thing is that we just forget that this is something that we have at our disposal.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of our A, intentions of using it, and B, the desire to use it in the way that it's meant to be structured. The amount of times that I've tried to reach out to these gate kept folks that you're talking about through their beautiful gates of their
Right.
agents, their managers, their assistants. And it took Months.
Mhm.
I had a guest that I really wanted to have on this podcast, and I tried to play all of the correct rules. I reached out truly like to all their reps, and they were back and forth with me. It took forever. And
Yeah.
truly, I actually wonder to this day if the person I was wanting to reach even knew that this was happening. I doubt it,
Mhm.
because it was taking so long and I was over it. And I was like, honestly, I just want a yes or a no directly from this person. And I got their email and I got their assistant's email, and I CC'd the two. And within an hour, I had a response from this person saying, "Oh my
Wow.
God, I'm so grateful that you reached out. This sounds unbelievable. I would love to be part of it. I'm booked and blessed for the next, however, I don't even know how long. But like, please keep me in mind. Circle back at this time." Many months later, I recircled back. Same kind of thing. Had a personal response back to them being like, "Still booked and blessed. Please, we're still so interested." But had I continued to play with the gatekeeping of it, this person
Right.
didn't even know that I was reaching out, trying to, not saying you must be a part of this thing. It was like an offering of like, I love
Yeah.
you and your work. I think you would be an incredible guest on this podcast. I think that you would really impact our listeners. Would you be open and willing? Totally cool. If not, let me know either way. The ask was open ended. And the playing of the gatekeeping rules is so, I understand why it's there, because the overwhelm can
Yeah.
be insane. I totally get it and I want to respect it. And sometimes it does come from a place where it's like, all right, I just want to know. And so
Yeah.
having the LinkedIn option of like, again, you're not demanding anything of a person. It's like it's an offering of, hey,
Right.
here's a thank you for the work that you do, or here's a admiration note for the things that I really
That's
think are
it.
awesome. This is an opportunity for me to want to connect with you because I really think you're dope. Here's that. Period. Not a, hey, can
Yeah.
you give me $100,000 or will you direct me in a show that you're putting on now? Like, we're not coming from that. We're coming from this is what's built into this system of, let me build my relationships, and you happen to be connected to me in these kind of ways. Let's see what comes from it. Um,
Yes, that's exactly right. That's so beautifully said. I love how you laid that down. That's exactly it. You're showing up with admiration and a potential invitation, and knowing that this work, not everybody checks LinkedIn every day.
yeah.
Sometimes people will get back to you, like you said, like in your story, like they'll get back to you 3 months later and be like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I don't check LinkedIn," but yes, and the
Mhm.
relationship will begin there, and maybe it'll go off LinkedIn, and that's okay because that's really, I see LinkedIn as that linkage, and
Yeah.
then you want to take it off LinkedIn
Yeah.
eventually.
I would love to talk to you about your like seat at the table boardroom philosophy.
Yeah, yeah. So my podcast is called The Campfire Circle, and in like
Mhm.
brand messaging world, marketing world, people say to be clear and concise and not cute. And I was like, you know what? No, I want to be a little cute with this, because this is what I'm about. But I explain it. So I think we all talk about getting a seat at the table, right? That's like the whole thing. And it's like, I don't really want to sit at the table. The table's boring. The table's stuffy. I've sat at the table and I
Mhm.
didn't like being there. It didn't feel good for me. And so my whole thing is, what if we just reframe the ultimate space of leadership from being this boardroom table to being more like a campfire circle? Because
Mhm.
if you imagine a campfire circle in your mind, like, what are the things that come up for you? Like, that's where we share our stories. That's where there's enough room for everyone. And like, yes, somebody might be sitting on a log, someone might be sitting on a little blankie, but like, there is enough room
Yeah.
for everyone. It's a circle. It can get as big as it needs to. And it's about like wherever, it's about a place where everyone belongs. And so to
Mhm.
me, that's what leadership is really about. And that's sort of the imagery I try to carry with me when I show up in the world, whether I'm writing a LinkedIn post, whether I'm hiring somebody on my team, whether I'm like putting out an offer. Like, I try to see everything through that lens, right? So that's kind of just like, I would almost call that like a branch of my vision. Like, that's just
Yeah.
how I see the world. That's the world I
Yeah.
want to live in.
I love that metaphor so much, because I feel not only is it like anybody can come and we're all, the space can open and expand and contract to be more intimate or expansive depending on how many people are there and what's taking place at a campfire. But it's also that people can be doing all sorts of things and none of
Mhm.
it and all of it matter. As in, I could be making my s'mores and eating it by myself.
Yes.
I could be making s'mores with somebody else and teaching somebody how to do it, or somebody else could be teaching me their ways of doing s'mores, which, by the way, the best way to do a s'more is if you take a chocolate and you shove it inside the marshmallow and then you shove the stick inside both, so that when the marshmallow gets on inflamed, which it has to, like, you need that thing to
Oh,
be
yeah.
blown up in
I'm all
flames.
about the char.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Full char. But because of the heat of the char and the chocolate's inside the marshmallow, the chocolate will melt. So you're not going to have a non-melted chocolate when you put it in between your, anyway, but you can have the people who are,
Incredible.
thank you so much. But you can have the people who are doing the s'mores, but you can have the person who's playing music. You can have a person who's now drumming on their like empty, seltzer
Yes.
can. You can have a person who is massaging somebody on the corner and somebody who is like dozing on somebody's lap. And everybody's doing something completely disparate, but it all is because they are surrounded in this community together. And because everyone's just in that space, that is the thing. And nothing matters, but
Yes.
everything matters. And it allows for everybody to be exactly where they are, and
Mhm.
own that people can be in many different emotional, physical, spiritual spaces at the same time, and yet they all still belong in the same space. And so it really leaves a lot of room. So for me, I love this metaphor, and I think it's such a beautiful invitation to remember that when we're creating spaces, that when we are building community, when we are networking, whether we like that word or not, there is this idea that if we're not trying to create this table that has a finite amount of space around it, but we're creating this campfire, then it really does feel expansive. It does feel like there's
Yes.
possibility. It does feel like it doesn't need to have rules, that it has to be a certain way and it has to look a certain way and it has to feel a certain way. I wanted to bring that into the space. I think it's such a wonderful gift of a reframe for how we can view community building and creating new rooms and spaces, where truly everyone is invited.
Yes, you absolutely get it. You just like A plus, like that was such a stunning description of what that is. That's
Thank
absolutely
you.
beautiful. And what I
Thank
got
you.
from that too is like there's no competition either. Like we can
Yeah.
all show up as ourselves and we all lift each
Yeah.
other up by just being there. So 100%, 100%.
Um, as we wind down our time, is there anything on your heart or spirit that we didn't talk about, whether it's in relationship to LinkedIn, whether it's in relationship to this campfire idea, whether it's in relationship to knowing that there are artists listening in this space, that is still on your heart?
Ah, this was such a beautiful, expansive, like heart-filling conversation. I would say just dip a toe in, even if you're just going to update that profile, even if you're just going to send a couple messages to people that you've been wanting to reach out to and haven't for whatever reason. Just dip a toe in and see what happens. Like the water's fine. And you just never know what seemingly miraculous, magical thing can emerge from there. Cause I've just seen it time and time and time again.
So
So,
good.
yeah.
So good.
Yeah. You
For
can't get this wrong. That's the other thing I'd say. You can't get this wrong.
Yeah, I think that's the fear though. The fear is like, oh no, but like, if I reach out to this person who is so insert, status here above me, then I've ruined this thing that is possible. It's like, well,
Mhm.
no, it's a hello.
It's a hello, it's an admiration, and who doesn't love getting that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I get it. I totally get it. I've been there. I've done this.
Me
I've
too.
literally, I feel it often where it's like, for anybody who wants to work with you, who wants to listen to your podcast, who wants to reach out and ask further questions, what within your boundaries is the best way for people to do so?
Definitely, I would say LinkedIn, connect with me on there, send me a message. I'd
What
love to
about
chat with
that being the
you.
first practice, like reaching out to you as the
Yes! Reach
first
out to me. Do that as the first thing, and I have a lot of wonderful people in my network, so if we're connected and you
Mhm.
start sharing and I start engaging, which I will, like that will be a beautiful thing. So reach out to me, connect. Beyond that, my podcast is called the Campfire Circle Podcast, so that's a great space if you want to hear all things storytelling, visibility, some more LinkedIn nuggets. And I think that there's like a resource that we're potentially going to share in the show notes. It's just like 14 ideas for LinkedIn content. So
Great.
check that out and go from there.
I love it. Thank you so much for being willing to be in this space, for sharing these tricks and these tools and this way of thinking. And I think you're dope. I feel like the work that you're doing is so in alignment and with what I do and try to do. And so I can't wait to continue building relationships that have to do with you and your sphere and see what comes from there. I think you're super rad, and I love what you stand for.
Well, right back at you. I mean, ditto times 100. Thank you so much for this opportunity and creating this
Yeah.
space and being in community together. I've loved this conversation.
Yay. Me too.